So again, it is with great pleasure that I will introduce to some of you Dr. Christopher Lucas. This morning we've had a very interesting talk about numerals in Maltese. Now he's going to talk to us about different Englishes. Chris did his BA in Arabic at SOAS University of London and his graduate study in linguistics at the University of Cambridge, where his doctoral thesis examined historical developments in the expression of negation in Arabic and related languages, including Maltese. After completing his PhD in 2010, he returned to SOAS in 2011 with a British Academy postdoctoral fellowship, and later in 2011 began a lectureship in Arabic linguistics, still at SOAS. And since 2015, he has been a senior lecturer in Arabic linguistics. His research and teaching focuses primarily on the historical evolution and contemporary description of varieties of Arabic and Maltese. Yeah, so the floor is yours, Chris.
Thank you very much, Michael. Thank you again. Thank you, all of you. Thank you, all of you, for coming. And I see a few faces from this morning, so thank you very much for coming back. I didn't put you off. That's good. Yes. So what I want to tell you about in this talk is some of the work that I've done on English, different varieties of English. And where possible, I always like to tie these topics into bigger topics in big questions in linguistics about, this morning we looked at how is knowledge of language organized in the brain. And actually, I want to consider a very similar issue now, but from a slightly different perspective. Basically, what is the nature of the linguistic knowledge that we have? Not so much how it's organized, but what is it like? What type of knowledge is it? So we'll get into that in a second. So for those of you who are here this morning, we can start with a refresher. Were you concentrating? I asked you in the morning what this is. Can you remember? Yes, it's a wag. And for those of you who weren't here in the morning, it comes from this seminal psycholinguistic study in the 1950s where Jean Berko was looking at children's learning of English morphology. So in this case, the plural of made-up words. So the made-up word here is wag. Okay, now the thing is, for me, one of the reasons that linguistics, the study of language, is such an interesting topic is that it intersects with so many other disciplines. Basically, from one point of view, it's part of the study of biology, right? It's part of the natural world. And that's a very important perspective from my point of view. Human beings are part of the natural world, and our minds are also part of that natural world. But then obviously it intersects with psychology, with sociology, with philosophy, and other domains besides. So let's look at, both biology and philosophy before we dive into the fine details of English. So that was one. I don't know what this. What is a wag? It's some kind of bird, maybe. I don't know. Here is definitely a bird. I don't know if there are any ornithologists. Does anyone know what this bird is? It's a very. Anyone? It's a very. I'm sorry?
Tell us.
Yes, I will. It's an indigo bunting. Yeah, it's a bird of North America. And it's very, very pretty, but it's not just a pretty face. It also does amazing things, and it's been the subject of some extremely interesting scientific studies, which I want to tell you about. And bear with me, the link with linguistics and English might be somewhat tenuous, but the link is there in my mind at any rate. So, okay, I want to ask you this. Does an indigo bunting know anything?
We don't know. We can't say it knows.
Okay.
But from its behavior, we can say that it knows a lot.
Okay.
And has good memory.
Right, right. I entirely agree with you. I entirely agree with you. There are many senses in which it knows a huge amount of things. And also it achieves, as I'll show you in a second, it achieves various types of activity which I would say have a clear intellectual content. And that is like extremely impressive. And the reason it's extremely impressive is because, of course, there's another sense in which it doesn't know anything. It's just a bird, right?
No.
You don't agree?
Those are ignorant people. Ignorant people talk like that.
Okay. But
Very ignorant.
would you agree, though, that human beings know a special set of things which, as far as we can tell, no animals, or at least most animals, they don't know. We have a type of knowledge, right? You don't agree with that?
I like to have an example. You know?
Yes.
You tell me, look, human beings
Yes.
behave like this.
Yes.
No.
Yes. Okay. So, let me try and think of a reasonable example. I mean, I could say, for example, you know, today is Thursday, and we're in Malta, and it's currently springtime, and after spring comes summer. These are all facts which everyone here knows, but does this indigo bunting know these kinds of facts?
But it does know when to migrate from one place to another.
It does. It does. But here's another question. Does it think, you know, do the cogs turn in its mind and it says to itself, the flowers are coming out, that must mean it's spring, for that reason I should now set off?
Why not believe it?
It's possible. It's possible. Do you know what? Ultimately, it doesn't matter too much for what I want to argue, whether we think it has that sort of conscious knowledge or not. But I think a lot of people would assume, rightly or wrongly, that it doesn't have that kind of knowledge. And this is where some of the kind of wonder of what animals like this comes from. Or take bees. You know, a bee is a simple insect. It's very hard to imagine that an insect can be intelligent. Now, of course, we have to be careful with what we mean by intelligent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because it gives a lot of trouble to
Yes.
intelligence.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. But if you sort of, in a naive sense, assume that a bee, it's not intelligent, of course not, it's just a dumb insect, then, and then you consider how bees can communicate. Now, I don't know if you guys know about this, but I mean, I'm no expert on this stuff, but my understanding is that bees leave the hive and they find sources of nectar, and then they come back to the hive and they're able to communicate to the bees in the hive where to find the nectar, and they communicate it with a special dance, a special waggling dance, and what they're communicating is things to do with, like, how does a bee without language communicate what direction you need to go and how far to go? The answer is extremely complicated, but it involves how high the sun is, and you have to fly at a certain angle towards the sun, and they can communicate these things. And that sort of boggles the mind if you start from the position that a bee is a dumb insect. So let me tell you what's great about this indigo bunting. So arguably it knows nothing or very little. Now, okay, we can certainly argue about that, but it can achieve amazing things. So each spring and autumn it migrates several thousand miles between North and Central or South America. So, you know, a bird might fly from, you know, it might spend the winter in Mexico and the summer in Canada. So, how does it navigate? Does anyone know what some of the strategies birds use to navigate are?
Which navigator? The bird or the bee?
The bird. We're on the bird now. They've got different birds use different things, and in reality, I think most birds use several strategies at once. But one of the most important strategies that this particular bird uses is the position of the stars. So, any sailors out here, do you know how you can navigate by the stars?
Yes,
Yeah.
pilots, when they lose much of their machines
Yeah.
on the plane, they navigate by the stars.
Yeah, how do they do it? What can you do?
I have never studied the stars scope, but I read about it.
Yeah. Does anyone know? Yeah, but what information can you get by observing the stars in terms of direction? Yeah?
Orientation.
Yeah. Which is the most important star? I mean, or to put it simply, the North Star, exactly, the North Star. So here's a nice video. It's like a time-lapse video of the night sky showing the tracks that the constellations take. Obviously, they appear to rotate. It's obviously the rotation of the Earth. And what you see is something like this. So in the middle, you have the North Star, which just so happens to be basically straight up from the North Pole in space. So when the Earth rotates, it doesn't appear to move. Whereas constellations sort of out to the side, as it were, they go right round. But the North Star essentially doesn't move. So if you find the North Star, you can, you know which way is north, and you can follow that, right? So what do these birds do? They study the night sky when they're chicks in the nest, and they figure out which is the fixed star, and it's the North Star, and then and you know which constellations neighbor it. So you know what you can, if it's a bit cloudy, maybe you don't want to depend only on the North Star, but if you know which constellations neighbor it, you can use those, and they use that knowledge to navigate. And I mean that's pretty mind-blowing, no? That they can achieve that. And there was a very interesting study in the 1970s by this guy, a biologist called Emlen. And what he did was he took indigo bunting chicks and put them in a planetarium. And he sort of, he changed the center of rotation of the stars in the planetarium. And he made this constellation, I don't know how to pronounce it, like Betelgeuse, you know, or Betelgeuse, or whatever you're supposed to call it. He made that the center of rotation for some indigo bunting chicks, and thereafter that is what they oriented themselves towards. So clearly their instinct as chicks is to find the center of rotation and then use that to navigate. So where am I going with all this? The point is all animals, it's not just bees and indigo buntings. When you look into it, all animals will exhibit amazing behavior of this kind which looks intelligent. The point is it involves very complex cognitive processes, okay? So now, obviously there's this idea that human beings are intelligent and animals aren't. And it probably does rest on some real distinction. And that real distinction, I would suggest, is probably the ability to do conscious abstract reasoning, right? So human beings obviously can do that, and most animals probably can't. So that's what I was referring to when, you know, The bird doesn't say to itself, it doesn't do this logical reasoning like, the days are getting warmer and the flowers are coming out, therefore it's spring, therefore I should do this. If I do this, then that will happen. It seems, if animals have that ability to do that kind of reasoning, they don't have it in anything like the way human beings do. But I think the important thing is, and this is where we're coming back to the topic of language and what it means to know a language, is we tend to overestimate how much of our own intelligent behavior is conscious, okay? And I think this is particularly true of language. So, what is knowledge of language? The point is we all have a huge amount of knowledge concerning the rules of the languages we know, but 99% of that knowledge is non-conscious. Okay? So you might want to not call it knowledge, but I think let's just call it knowledge. We know our languages. The point is we know our languages in a similar sense to the sense in which an indigo bunting knows which is the center of rotation, which star is in the center of rotation in the night sky. So, again, to pick up an example from this morning, so many of you were here this morning that it slightly undermines it, but never mind. So if we take this question of when do you get this final T in numerals in Maltese, so let's consider this. Do you, let's start with this one. Oops. Who would say زوج حوينت?
It's not wrong.
But do you prefer?
We usually use the te marbuta.
Yeah.
That means te tied to.
Yeah. So you would say زوج تحوينت. You think that sounds better?
If I am teaching a class, I tell them to write زوج تحوينت.
Right.
Knowing that there is زوج حوينت.
Right. Okay. What about this one? Here I think no one says زوج كليب, or hardly, okay? And here no one says أربع سنين, right? Everyone says أربع سنين. So the point is, and we saw this morning, people know what they say. They know that there's only really one option for the bottom two, and there's probably two options for the top one.
Because the second letter in Hweenet is W, a weak consonant.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now see, you have a theory for why we say زوجت in this example, right? But the point is, generally speaking, for the mass of Maltese people, they just do it. They just do what they do. They say what they say without being able to articulate there's no conscious knowledge of the logic underlying what they say.
But cleave, the second one, cleave, the L, the consonant L is a weak consonant.
Yes, right.
Consonant.
This is probably, this is probably relevant. Is most likely relevant. But what you're doing there is you're doing some linguistics, right? And let's say a child who speaks Maltese and who will exhibit the same behavior as everyone else, they will say either زوج or زوجت for the first one, and they'll only say زوج تكليب, and they'll only say أربع سنين. They won't know what. I mean, consciously they won't be able to express why.
Chris,
yeah.
The questions at the end, because we need to use the mic.
Ah, yes. Oh, yes, good point. Yes.
But very often, when there is interruption, the lesson becomes better.
Okay. All right. So, Yes. So what I want to argue here is that the way people speak is determined almost entirely by the type of speech that they've been exposed to, okay? And it's hardly at all determined by what you've explicitly been taught. And what's more, that's true of everyone, including speakers of standard English. And I think a lot of people fail to understand this, especially people who speak a type of English like me, which approximates standard English. Non-linguists, like, you know, I've seen this with, you know, family members and friends. If they speak English in a way that is generally approved of, that looks like standard English, they tend to imagine that that's because they've sort of worked hard and learnt the rules of standard English. And other people who don't follow those rules have somehow been lazy and haven't put the work in to figure out how to speak standard English. But that's completely false, okay? If you look at the proportion of the grammatical rules of a language that ordinary people know explicitly, it's minute compared to the proportion of the rules that are just subconsciously known, right? So, you know, if you ask someone about the rules of English, they'll most likely point to, actually ironically, they'll most likely point to rules which do not apply to the English that most people speak, right? Things like, you know, most people, including me, say, you know about less and fewer when you're not supposed to say things like, there's less people in this talk than this morning. You're supposed to say fewer, supposed to say fewer, because the idea is that people is a count noun, and you're supposed to only use less with mass nouns like less noise. Or who versus whom, you know, it's fair to say that no one who speaks English learns when you're supposed to say whom, if they ever learn it, until they go to school and they're taught it explicitly in school. But of course, you don't need to go to school to be able to speak, right? So if all we knew was this handful of kind of rather odd rules, usually that have been cooked up by someone or other for unclear reasons, then communication would be impossible. Okay, so this brings us on to this question of prescriptivism versus descriptivism. So, I mean, this is completely obvious to a lot of you here, but the point is that a key goal of linguistics is to discover the rules and patterns underlying the way people speak any language. And virtually all academic linguists, what we do is we describe and analyze language without prescribing how it ought to be spoken, okay? So when it comes, now this next point might superficially appear to contradict the point that I've just made. And that is, you know, we have standard languages, standard English, standard Maltese, and there are clear norms which you have to follow if you want to, as it were, qualify as speaking standard English or standard Maltese. Yeah, so standard languages exist, and they're probably inevitable, and I would say they're also probably beneficial, right? It's helpful to have a sort of for communication, for kind of formal communication between people who aren't necessarily from the same community. It's helpful to have a standardized language and you know, to minimize misunderstandings and so on. And obviously, given the nature of the societies we find ourselves in, we have these standard languages, and if you want to get on in life, you have to learn to speak them. And so, of course, we want to teach children to be proficient in using standard English, standard Maltese, and so on. But I would say it's nonsensical to say that one way of speaking, for example, standard English, or a non-standard English is inherently worse. There's some sort of, it has less value than speaking standard English, for example. So let's look at some examples of this to illustrate this. Oh yes, this I couldn't resist including this nice quote from Steven Pinker. You know Steven Pinker? These days he's best known for this idea that that the world is getting better and better, which makes a lot of people absolutely furious, this idea. And yeah, it's maybe a little simplistic, but he's got a lot of charts which suggest that anyway. But 20 plus years ago, he spent most of his time doing linguistics, in fact. And in the 90s, he published this absolutely excellent popular introduction to linguistics called The Language Instinct, which I highly recommend. It's a very, very good book. It explains everything extremely well, and it's usually quite humorous. Sometimes the humor, to my mind, gets a little bit grating, but often it's spot on, and here I really like it. So if you'd just allow me to read this, he says, imagine that you're watching a nature documentary. The video shows the usual gorgeous footage of animals in their natural habitats, but the voiceover reports some troubling facts. Dolphins do not execute their swimming strokes properly. White-crowned sparrows carelessly debase their calls. Chickadees' nests are incorrectly constructed. Pandas hold bamboo in the wrong paw. The song of the humpback whale contains several well-known errors, and monkeys' cries have been in a state of chaos and degeneration for hundreds of years. Your reaction would probably be, what on earth could it mean for the song of the humpback whale to contain an error? Isn't the song of the humpback whale whatever the humpback whale decides to sing? Who is this announcer anyway? So the point, of course, is to draw a parallel between people's attitudes to language and how language ought to be spoken, and what Pinker would see and what I would see is as other aspects of the natural world. With other aspects of the natural world, we just describe and we enjoy the beauty and diversity. But when it comes to language, there seems to be this tendency to despise much of the variety of language and to prefer just a narrow subset of what is out there. So people who are keen on the idea that standard English is good and non-standard English is bad will often make appeal to logic and say that standard English is more logical. Or they'll say that a particular rule, like for example, when you should say less and when you should say fewer, is based on logic, and people are being illogical when they break this rule. But if you dig into it, this is, you see that this is nonsense, okay? So all varieties of English and all varieties of any language have a lot of logic in them and a fair bit of bizarre non-logic, okay? So just to give you a little bit of a sense of illogical standard English, one thing you can think about is the word quite, right? So what does quite mean, anyone?
What was the question?
What does quite mean? Do we need to use this? Okay.
Modulation of tone as well.
Yeah. This Maltese food is quite tasty. Right. The point is, quite means basically two things: completely, or very, or slightly. Basically, it means one thing and its opposite. Right? And an interesting thing here is that's British English. In American, the original meaning is number one. And British English has innovated the reverse meaning. Quite how it happened, I'm not sure. But American English, in this particular respect, is more conservative, and it only has the first meaning. So, and I've noticed this in real life. It causes confusion when I speak to Americans or Canadians. So, for example, you know, if you as a British person say to an American person, your work is quite good, you likely mean, it's quite good, it's okay. But they might feel very pleased with themselves because they understand it as meaning very, very good. Okay, what about another example? The verb to be. Have you ever considered that in 1 and 2, we have two very different uses of the verb to be, right? In the first one, it's equality. That there equals that there. That equals John. Whereas number 2, it's predication. You're saying John has the property of being nice. And don't take it from me, take it from one of the most important logicians of all time. I came across this quote many years ago, and I've always loved it. It's so ridiculously over the top, but it illustrates the point. So this is Bertrand Russell. He said, "It is a disgrace to the human race that it has chosen to employ the same word is for these two entirely different ideas." And you know, it's a crazy exaggeration, but the point is, they are two very different ideas. And yet, English just collapses them into one. So I don't think we're on firm ground if we try to say that standard English deserves to be put on a pedestal above other types of English because it's somehow more logical. This is another nice example. So this is from Afro-American vernacular English. Okay, so there's two issues here. The first is that what you will find if you listen to Afro-American vernacular English is that often there's no verb to be where you would expect one from standard English. So you could say something like John Nice. Okay, and there is a tendency on the part of people who haven't considered the matter carefully to assume that the verb to be is just dropped at random, right? Or even perhaps that out of laziness people drop it because they can't be bothered to say it. Well, in fact, it's not in the least bit random. It follows precisely the same rule as where in standard English you can contract is to apostrophe S. So you can say John is nice in standard English. You can also say John's nice. Therefore, in Afro-American vernacular English, you can say John nice. In standard English, you can't say I don't know where he's. You have to say I don't know where he is. Therefore, in Afro-American vernacular English, you cannot say I don't know where he. Right? So it's a kind of extreme contraction. Instead of contracting is to us, you just delete it. But it follows exactly the same rules as contraction in standard English. Then there's another thing, which is the progressive. So in English, we just have the one standard English, we just have the one progressive form, who or whose eating. Whereas in Afro-American vernacular English, there's two possibilities. You can say who eating or who be eating. And again, you might be tempted to say, oh, it's just random. Sometimes they can't be bothered to put in the be. You know, you'll hear ideas like this the whole time. They haven't bothered to learn the right rule. Actually, it's a really rather subtle, there is a rule underlying whether this be appears or not. And it's quite subtle and interesting, and it expresses a logical distinction that standard English doesn't express. And this was very nicely demonstrated by a PhD thesis by, I think she was called Janice Jackson, who showed, what she did was she showed children, American children, some of them speakers of Afro-American vernacular English and some not, these two pictures. And this is from Sesame Street, right? And this here, do you know who that is? Is the Cookie Monster. He spends his whole time eating cookies. And this is Elmo, who is not known for eating cookies. I mean, there's nothing stopping him eating cookies, but eating cookies is what the Cookie Monster does almost all the time, whereas Elmo doesn't do it more than any normal person. And so they showed, Jackson showed these two groups of children these pictures and asked the question, who be eating cookies? And you see here that Elmo's eating a cookie, right? The children who didn't speak Afro-American vernacular English said, Elmo. Elmo's eating cookies. All of the speakers of Afro-American vernacular English said, Cookie Monster be eating cookies. Because what be eating means is it's actually not a simple progressive. The simple progressive in this variety would be with the zero, who eating. And who be eating means like who, as a general rule, typically eats cookies. Okay? So the point is that there's real systematicity and subtlety underlying these constructions which deviate from standard English. Okay, so continuing this kind of theme, I wanted to tell you a bit about some work that I did with David Willis about the English word never. So, to introduce this topic, here's some complaining about language that I found on the internet. It's absolute nonsense from start to finish. So I hesitate to put it up and sort of pollute your minds with it, but I'll do it anyway. Just, you know, read with caution. So this person wrote in a comment somewhere, the biggest grammar error that gets to me at the moment is the misuse of never. For example, did you do that? No, I never. Are you familiar with this construction? No, I never. It means no, I didn't. Okay? It's obviously not standard English. So the person goes on, I'm not that good with my grammar in the first place, but wow. And now he goes into just nonsense. But he's trying, I guess. I don't know why I say he. Maybe it's a woman. Never is present continuous. It refers to the now and into the future forever. It cannot or never refer to the past. Didn't or haven't refer to the past. Right. So that's all just horrible. But the point is, I introduce it I'm showing you this to introduce you to this use of never. So, and this is what we investigated in this paper. So what is going on here? First of all, how can we describe the function of the ordinary use of never, right? So here's an example of never being used in its typical way. Although karate developed in Japan, that country has never won a team world championship. So what does never mean? Who? Huh? Right. It's not plus time. What you could say is universal temporal quantification. Basically, always. All units of time. Not for all time. Right? Or always not. Something like that. So the point is, in London English, never, in addition to having that function, it has another function as a straightforward negator, just restricted to the past tense. So it just means not. So here are some examples from a corpus of English as spoken by working class adolescents in London. The corpus was actually put together to investigate this very interesting variety of English that's called, it's been called multicultural London English. So you've probably heard of Cockney, the traditional working class London English, which you hardly hear in London itself now. You have to go to Essex to find it. In London, you now hear multicultural London English, which has a lot in common with Cockney, but especially the pronunciation is quite different. So here we found a couple of examples of this from that corpus. So, you know, rather than just me inventing one, here's a real life one. I had to deliver stuff around Westminster, and I got hit by a taxi. I never got hurt or nothing, just knocked me off my bike, right? He's not talking about like whenever he rode his bike, he never got hurt. He's saying there was this one moment I got knocked off, but I didn't get hurt. But he uses never. And then another example, well, in art I used to get bare A's. Have you come across this? Bare? This is a new London slang thing. It means like loads of or very, okay? So in art I used to get bare A's. Well, the next day they never put me back in art because I was talking too much, okay? So never, in terms of the quantification over time, that doesn't work here. So it clearly just means not. The next day, they didn't put me back in art. Okay. So, standard British English doesn't have this use of never, or does it? Okay. Clearly, it's, you know, these uses in these contexts, these are not possible in standard English, okay? But if you look into it, you find that standard English has very similar things. So, for example, this is from a newspaper, Kenny Dalglish has come to see a side of Alan Shearer that he never knew existed when he shelled out 3.3 million on the England striker, right? It's not that he never, in his whole life, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about when he shelled out 3.3 million. And yet you can say never. That is something special about no. For some odd reason, in standard English, with no, you can say never knew. I never knew that, and it means I didn't know it. Mind, in this particular expression, is the same. Never mind, say market optimists, the first quarter of 1991 promises to make up much lost ground. So never mind. It doesn't mean never. It just means don't worry. Also fear, never fear. It means the same. Don't worry. I like this example. Never fear, you can still buy an attractive necktie at King's Cross's Tie Rack Emporium. Okay? So there are some uses like the non-standard use also in standard English. And what about these? This is a very real construction, but it can be hard to find very clear examples. So these I invented, but these sound perfect to me in standard English. So John woke up yesterday, but he never got out of bed. Earlier today, John made his way to the end of the highest diving board, but he never jumped. John set off up the mountain yesterday morning, but he never reached the top.
Is that any different to didn't?
I would argue no, it's not. I would argue no, it's not.
Would you say that? Because I would have said didn't in all of those cases.
Right, okay. You wouldn't say never here.
When you read it, I think I would, if I was writing it,
Or it doesn't sound...
because that would seem more correct to me.
Fair enough. The point is, this connects with a point which I'm going to come to, which is that within standard English, just like any other variety of English or any other language, there's variation, right? Some people do some things, some people do other things, and it still counts as standard English. This is definitely not just me, you know. If you go looking for it, you can find these usages in the writing of people who are held up as paragons of English style, okay? In fact, I found one, for example, from Tolkien. I forget what it is now, but is basically like these, okay?
I think if anything, it's something like, you get it, if you use that phrase, it's something like, he certainly didn't jump. It might be asked to sort of something like that.
Yeah.
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 And then the contrast comes out a bit more between his aim and his non-accomplishment.
I completely agree. But those nuances, I would argue, here we're getting into real subtleties, but I would argue that those nuances emerge from the whole context rather than sort of being encoded in the never. It seems to me that the never just expresses negation, and those nuances come from the types of predicates that you can use never with in this function. The question is, why are those sentences fine while these are not? I felt ill yesterday, but I never died. I never watched TV yesterday. I never forgot to ring my mother yesterday. The answer is, in standard English, never can function as a straightforward negator, but only with a highly restricted set of predicates, verbs. And it's sort of like astonished me when I looked into this and found out what the verbs are, what the types of verbs are that you can use never with in this way. Basically, the most snappy, simplest description I can use is non-chance completive achievement predicates. And I'm not going to explain what I mean by that because it doesn't really serve my purposes. You can read Lucas and Willis 2012 to understand it. The point is, it's like incredibly subtle and complicated. And, here are some examples that helps. Things like to reach, to finish, to come home. It's not something that happens by chance. It's what's known in the technical terminology as an achievement. In ordinary language, that implies that it's impressive in some way. That's not what's meant by achievement here. But it's a type of predicate, and you're completing something as well. So the point is, this is an extremely subtle restriction that is very hard to understand, even if you do linguistics for a living. And so, of course, no one ever learnt that the rule and the restrictions on that rule consciously. Okay, and so if you speak this way, it's simply because the people around you do too. Okay, and what it really underlines for me is, I just always have this sense of wonder at the intellectual feats that, well, non-human species can achieve, for sure, like the migrating birds and so on, but also human beings, when it comes to language, we make these incredibly subtle analyses of language. It's like, we like to think that our conscious mind is the boss. It's pulling all the strings. But really, when you consider how we learn language and what we learn, as well as some other sources of evidence, more and more it looks to me much more like, the conscious mind is a sort of a puppet. It's like a puppet ruler, and really it's the non-conscious mind that is incredibly powerful and can achieve these incredible things, which the conscious mind finds it very hard to wrap its head around, if you see what I mean. Okay. So the point is, Standard English can use never as a simple negator, but it has this very subtle restriction. And the non-standard varieties that, like London English, that have this wider use of never, what they do is they relax the restriction and they allow never to be a plain negator with any past tense verb. And then there's also this thing that there's a special syntax, so you can say, someone accuses you of something, you did this, you can say, no, I never, which is this, you can't like leave out the verb like that in Standard English. So in this respect, London English is simpler than Standard English. It's simplified this rule. But, don't go sort of cherry-picking this as a piece of evidence that Standard English is complex and non-standard varieties are just simpler. Because if you look at them globally, that's not gonna prove to be true. There'll be some aspects in which Standard English is more complex and non-standard varieties are simpler, and other aspects in which it's the reverse. Okay. Okay. So here's another example. This is a completely different construction, something that I've been working on more recently. So here we go. Here comes a sentence of Standard English, and you have to tell me if you think it's correct or if there's a mistake. I want one of those typewriters that does all the work for you. Fine? It's completely fine for me. Can anyone tell me why I'm even putting it up there? Why might it not be fine?
Because of which instead of that?
Good question. But I mean, good suggestion. But that's not what I'm interested in.
Those, maybe.
Those.
Rather than a simple definite article.
Sorry.
Rather than I want a typewriter.
Well, not directly, perhaps indirectly, that's getting to it, but that's not the direct reason. I mean, I really like this. This is great because this is illustrating that it's just an absolutely unexceptionable part of English. But if you look into it, this is an outrage. I'm going to come over all Russell on you because this... Sorry?
But Russell would use that, not which.
Maybe, but that's not what I'm concerned with here.
Yes, but
The number of the guards.
There we go. There we go. We're talking about typewriters, which do things. Yeah, it's all very well saying but one, but the point is, this does not mean what we do not have is a bunch of typewriters that we've been talking about. And so they're those typewriters. And we're saying, oh, I want one that does all the work for you. No, that's not what we're saying. We're talking about typewriters that do all the work for you. And you want one of those. So here's another example. So the yeah.
Is this distinction between what is a sort of grammatical subject and a logical subject? This is, I relate this very much to Italian.
Yeah.
So you would say something like, for example, let me try and get a good example. Una ventina di automobili, a 20-fold of cars.
Yes.
And then you use the plural, you know.
Yes.
Hanno,
Yes.
or sono state parcheggiate, you know. And so a 20-fold of cars,
Yes.
plural.
Yes. That's a very...
Whereas in the grammatical subject, you'd actually have to use the singular.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good suggestion. Of course, you have the same sort of thing in English. So like, a lot originally is a singular noun. So if you go back far enough, people used to say, a lot of people has come, one lot, right? But there's been some sort of reanalysis such that a lot is like a quantifier, meaning many, and so a lot of people have come. Yeah, I'm not going to go into all of the reasoning and evidence now, but we can exclude that as an explanation of what's going on here. Actually, maybe this example helps to show that because it illustrates the same thing but in a different way. Because it's not about subject agreement. So the Doc Martin has now been granted official recognition. It's one of the words making its debut in the new shorter Oxford English Dictionary, rather than there. Yeah? Yeah, do you see? So there's a whole bunch of words making their debut, and this is one of them. But for some reason, again, it's not about like, we're not talking about words. We haven't been talking about words generally, and now we're talking about one that's making its debut. We're talking about words that are making their debut. So the point is these structures are very common. So I looked into this in the British National Corpus, which is a 100 million word corpus of English, and basically in the contexts where this, basically in constructions like this, where you could have plural or singular agreement, is basically 50-50. Half the time it's singular, half the time it's plural. So they're very common, but why are they possible at all? This is the question. That's what absolutely fascinated me about this when I noticed it. I actually noticed it when I was reading my PhD student's work, and she wrote something like, Baghdad Arabic is one of the dialects which are maybe something like that. Baghdad Arabic is one of the dialects which are undergoing this change. And I was reading it quickly, you know, correcting typos, correcting spelling mistakes. I said, blah, 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 right, no, no, is. And then I was moving on and I thought, whoa, hold on. No, I can't do it. That can't be right. I couldn't, you know, it sounded better to me, but then when I thought about it, I couldn't find any justification for how is could possibly be better than are there, right? So that's why I decided to start looking into it. So the point is, you know, how is it possible at all? Because outside of this construction, where you have elements in relative clauses referring back to the antecedent, of course, just like in English generally, they have to agree in number. So you can't say typewriters that does all the work for you. You just can't. And you can't say the words making its debut. It's just utterly ungrammatical. But when you put them inside this construction, it becomes fine. So why is it possible at all? You know, I have an explanation, but what I found sort of annoying because of my sort of philosophy of how one ought to do linguistics is the explanation I have is impossible to state non-technically. It depends on the particular theoretical framework that I'm using, which I don't like. But I mean, maybe there is a non-technical explanation. So, you know, this gentleman at the back was suggesting, oh, it's something to do with the one, and that's, you know, that's very reasonable. But when you look into it, that sort of reasoning doesn't really withstand scrutiny. So yeah, there doesn't seem to be a satisfying non-technical explanation. But interestingly, you find this, it's not just a quirk of English. So there's probably something systematic about it. There's something logical, if you like, about it. So you get it in Maltese as well. So, waħda mill-attivitajiet li ġiet organizzata. No, is it z? Z, yeah. Right, and not Joe. Would Joe be possible?
Pardon? Would G? No.
Joe. It would be possible, right? So it's the same thing.
Waħda mill-attivitajiet li ġew lingwa waħda at the beginning.
Yeah.
It's singular waħda.
Yeah.
Ġew plural.
It's perfectly fine to use
Yeah.
the plural.
Yeah.
Plural participle as well.
Yes, of course. Yeah. And or here's another example. I'm not going to read it out with my bad Maltese, but one of the few roads in the village which is used, which are used. Okay. Again, you know, if you look at the context, it's not that the village has a few roads, and one of them is used in this way. We're talking about the few roads which are used as two-way. Okay? All right. So again, this is to illustrate, to give you another example of, you know, if maybe there is some deep logic here. There probably is, seeing as it's found in multiple different languages. But even with like deep thought, I've not been able to find an explanation that I can just state like this. So that shows you, it's like QED, that shows you that when people are doing this, it's because they're just saying what they've heard. It's not based on any sort of conscious reasoning that they're not consciously following some rule that they've been explicitly taught.
Is this possible in Arabic?
It seems not to be. Yeah.
Dialects?
As far as I can tell, not. The trouble is, in Arabic, there's a real complication, which is that, luckily Maltese doesn't have this. The complication is that when you have a plural noun, the verb can agree with it by being feminine singular. Yeah. Example. Il-kelab matet. The dogs died. Instead of matu. Il-klib meeted. Yeah. You can do either of these in Arabic. So that makes it more complicated. But basically, it seems not to be possible. It seems not to be possible in Arabic. I don't know why. Yeah. But you get it in, as far as you get it in most European languages. I wonder if there's a sort of language contact explanation. It's maybe like a European type thing. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So okay, my message again is that language is full of these bizarre intricacies and no one's ever taught them, right? But children acquire them effortlessly. Okay, so we briefly touched on this before. The point is that there's variation at any one time within what counts as standard English. And standard English, what counts as standard English changes over time. But if standard English is, has these set rules and that's what's correct, how can it possibly be that that standard English can change over time? It's only by breaking the rules. Someone must have broken the rules, right? And who has the right to do that? So here's a nice example. This is a poster from the Second World War. So it's less than 80 years ago. It says, in ships, tonnage and gunpowder, the navies of the British Empire are the most powerful sea force in the world. And another 1 million tons of British warships are building. I mean, I would say that is utterly ungrammatical these days. What you have to say now is are being built. But this passive progressive, being built, is a very recent construction in English. I think it essentially didn't exist before the 18th century at the very earliest. And what you just did this. And clearly for whoever wrote this poster, this was still this was the correct way to express that 80 years ago, less than 80 years ago. And now it would be, there'd be irate letters to the editor of the Telegraph if
You get that construction if you go to a BOV bank machine. It says the request is processing.
But that's I think that's probably the same result by a different route, namely making process into a sort of, giving it a sort of middle type. What would another example of that be? I can't think of another example, but I think that might be a case of process changing from being obligatorily transitive to some sort of like middle type thing. Yeah. Okay. So the point is that standard English is not fixed, and not all of its rules are known even to linguists. Okay. And therefore, standard English is actually just the way a certain group of people happen to speak or write English at the present time. Basically, the elite. Yeah? And in that respect, it's just like any other type of English or any other language. Okay. So let me. I'm drawing to the end here, and I'll tell you a bit about some work that I've done recently on Maltese English. I mean, I haven't spoken much about Maltese English because I haven't done a lot of work on Maltese English, and I don't want to make out like I'm an expert when I don't consider myself an expert at all. But I've dabbled a little bit, and what I've worked on is article omission, the omission of the definite article in Maltese English. But let's start with British English. So here's some more strange stuff. Now this I would never say. I can't say this. It is government's aim to create a class of full-time professional farmers. That's just nonsense to me. I have to say the government. It's the government's aim.
But Russell wouldn't say it.
I don't know what. Well, I doubt Russell would say it. I doubt Russell would say it. I don't think so. I'll tell you what Russell might have done. What Russell might have said is, this is something I noticed when I did my PhD in Cambridge, and Cambridge and Oxford, they are divided into colleges. And obviously the colleges have names, but among the members of one college, you can call that college college. So, are you going to college? So basically, what I think is going on here is that within a particular kind of in-group, certain words, which basically I think they have to refer to institutions of one kind or another. In an in-group, you can decide to treat them as if they're names. So government becomes a name, and cabinet is a name. But because I have nothing to do with politics, I can't bring myself to say, cabinet was asked to look at the probable growth in the economy. Another example is in the Labour Party in the UK, they refer to their annual conference as conference. Have you, what happened in conference? Again, it's like no one says that unless they feel closely connected with that group of people. Okay. In the British National Corpus, there's a lot of political stuff, so you get a lot of this. So it definitely counts as standard English, but I would never say it. Now, maybe it doesn't sound too strange in Malta, because if you look at Maltese English, you get a lot of this. But government yesterday distanced itself.
But the ignorant ones.
I don't know about that. The point is, you get it. You get it.
Philosophers won't use it.
I don't know. I don't know who does or doesn't use it.
Those that are philosophers, not those that call themselves philosophers.
Okay.
Or called by others philosophers.
Okay.
Those that are.
Okay, but a lot of Maltese do it.
Oh, yeah.
So here's another one. These are precisely the sort of proposals that cabinet should be discussing. So the point is, it's the same phenomenon, but if you compare it quantitatively, in corpora of Maltese English, these uses are far, far more frequent than in standard British English. So then the question arises, is it actually the same phenomenon or not? And I think it's actually a different phenomenon. Something else is going on, right? So what then? So in British English, at least some types of British English, I think what's going on is you can treat certain institutions as names and drop the article for that reason. What about Maltese? Well, basically this article dropping is attested more widely. So in corpora and in just overhearing people speaking Maltese English, we came across these. So budget, beginning, majority, receptionist, rector. None of those would ever omit the article in British English, but in Maltese English you find it. So,
and so in English they would say the majority.
yes.
That's an error.
Huh?
That's an error.
To say the majority?
An error.
Not for me.
Russell, who will tell you.
Maybe, but you.
It's an error.
In the 100 million word British national corpus, there are no examples of majority without an article. Okay, so here's an example of budget. So extra funding to finance this may need to be incorporated in 2010 budget. You don't find budget without the article in British English. Okay, beginning. Consumer price inflation fell less than expected in beginning of this year. This is also written, so it's not some sort of, transcribing error for speech. People do this. Maybe a lot of people don't do it, but some people do it. And then.
But you'd say inflation fell less than expected.
Yes, of course. Yes. Now, well, this is the point. This is the point. In standard British English, the rules for when you must have the article, when you must not have the article, when the article is optional, are incredibly complicated and have no basis in logic.
Yes, they have. Yes.
Well, can you tell me what the logic is?
You see, I should be philosopher or professor of philosophy. I will not teach it unless I am made professor of philosophy.
Okay, but there
is an explanation.
But you don't know it, do you?
I know it,
Well,
but I will not teach it.
Okay, all right.
When they make me professor, I teach it.
I see. Well, that's a good strategy.
And
okay.
they made Joseph Ruggieri. He knew no philosophy whatsoever when he came to Oxford.
Oh dear.
I can say it because I examined him.
Okay. Now, what about majority? So I think, do you like this? Do you like this example? Water in Malta is very expensive. Majority of our water, we get it in our houses. Do you like the fact that there's no article there?
There is something else to put instead of the.
What do you mean?
Before majority.
What do you mean?
Instead of the majority, there is something else that can be put instead of the before majority, and it will be logical.
Okay, but my question is this an error or is it okay?
In philosophy, in logic, you won't do it.
Okay, but we're talking about English.
Yes, but philosophy of language.
Yeah.
Then there is philosophy of the English language.
This is true, but the point I'm trying to make is that I think we ought to describe the types of English or the types of any language that we actually find,
Yes.
yeah, rather than say
Of course, yes.
how it actually ought to be.
It applies only to English. It applies to Maltese.
Yes, of course.
Venetian for it.
Albert, yeah.
Chris,
Yeah.
just as you are drawing a distinction between what you consider to be standard English and non-standard varieties of English,
Yes.
I think we should be thinking also of, what we could call standard Maltese English
Sure.
as opposed to
Sure.
non-standard.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I completely agree.
This sounds simply wrong.
Right.
I think, Chris, there might be an issue of markedness.
Yes.
At least for these examples, in the sense that I obviously perceive, like Bernard is saying, majority, and even your previous example, the beginning is
Yes.
being very high demand.
Right.
Budget, on the other hand, is perfectly acceptable to me.
Right.
So will be your example with rector.
Right. Yes.
I don't know what.
Yes.
So, now,
Yeah,
now,
this-
now
it's-
in the
it's-
case of rector, my interpretation could be that in Malta, at least till now, having only one university,
Yeah.
rector is rector.
Yes.
And cannot
Yes.
you know,
Yes. Now,
so
but yeah.
automatically it's
It's the same with university.
Yep.
You don't use the article.
Yep.
You say
we
university.
say
Yeah.
rector.
And it's the same with budget.
It was an
It's
exempt bill. Use it in a sentence.
You can say, for example, the rector decided to call Senate on the 25th of. I mean, but this pertains very much to the example that you also gave with college.
yeah. Yeah.
Because, for example, I don't know, now this is just something, this is very anecdotal, but for somebody who did attend a college even here in Malta, amongst people who attended that same college, we could say il-kulleġ.
Yeah.
And it would refer to psychology, basically, and not to another college.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, but
Yeah.
this is, let's repeat, this is just anecdotal. I'm just
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you very much. Yeah. No, I completely agree with your point, Albert. Yes, this is undoubtedly true.
So my
Yeah.
work, I speak of a spectrum
Yes.
of possibilities,
Yes.
you know, which
Yes.
are
Yes.
covered by
Yes. So this is what's going on here in Maltese English is very complex. So now the point is about rector. Yes, of course, it is extremely relevant that there's only one rector. In that sense, what we argued in this paper is it's precisely for that reason that the article is dropped. It felt to be sort of OTOs. It's unnecessary. It's doing no work. But the same is true of beginning. There's, you know, there can only be one beginning. Majority is sort of similar in that you can't have many majorities. I mean, there's something different going on because you can also say a majority, and the difference between a majority and the majority is unclear. But the point is, certainly from a semantic point of view, the definite article is not necessary there. And then the question of who takes that logic how far is very, very interesting. You know, obviously what we could call standard Maltese is heavily influenced by standard British English or standard American English, probably much more British. Of course, it's not constrained by it, but it's heavily influenced by it. So that's bound to act as a sort of drag on people who want to speak English in Malta in a standard way. They're not going to totally ape standard British English, not at all, but it's going to exert an influence. Whereas speakers of Maltese English who aren't particularly concerned with speaking a sort of high register variety, this sort of logic whereby you can drop the article when it's unnecessary, that's going to be more appealing and they're going to apply it more across the board. So this was from speech. And I should say, by the way, that there were like 6 examples of this in the corpus, but they were all from the same person, like a tour guide. So it could be very idiosyncratic. Maybe it's only her who does it. Somehow this PowerPoint is playing up. It's not letting me. I will hit escape. Let's try this. This is just to show you that I think there really is no even fast the.
Water in Malta is very expensive. The electricity or watering in our houses.
Do you agree? I don't think that the has sort of been swallowed there. It's simply not there. Okay. So we've said this already. What permits article dropping in standard British and Maltese English? In-groups in Britain can treat government and cabinet and so on like names. Okay, this is too sort of coarsely put. But as a generalization, we can say Maltese English drops the article wherever it is redundant from the point of view of meaning. Okay, if it's not doing any semantic work, then from a certain point of view you don't need it. But then of course there are all sorts of other considerations like not departing too far from standard British English, which will perhaps, you know, act as a brake on dropping the article. Okay. Okay, so now I get to my conclusion. So, as I said before, standard English is here to stay, and I think there's nothing wrong with it at all. And we should definitely teach children and adults to be proficient in standard English because it's an important part of English-speaking society. The reason we should teach people to be proficient in it is not because it's somehow superior to other varieties, but because you know, it's a hoop that society has decided we have to jump through to succeed. And I would say that British English, Maltese English, Afro-American Vernacular English, and so on, are all uniquely valuable parts of the rich tapestry of human language, which itself is part of the natural world in general. And that's what I want to say. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. Thank you once again for a very interesting talk. Now we have plenty of time for questions and comments. Yeah, please use the mic.
Chris, thank you very much for a very stimulating
Thank
talk. I have several, points which I'd like to exchange with you, but
Yes.
I don't want to take too much time, so maybe I'll stop and then come in again later. Starting at the very end of your talk, where you say we should teach standard English, of course.
Yeah.
In 1977, the Department of English, the Department of Maltese, and the British Council organized a conference on bilingualism in Malta.
Yeah.
And they brought over a speaker, I still remember his name, Geoffrey Broughton, he must be dead now for many years, who caused the mini revolution and got almost stoned for suggesting, well, for proposing that we should not teach standard English in Malta, but be a bit more careful with our resources and teach standard Maltese English.
Right.
But it does, drive in the point that, as I try to say, that I think we don't have simply one uniform variety, but
Yes.
I mean, you've given us examples here. I don't doubt that they came from Maltese speakers of English,
Yeah.
but it doesn't mean that I or many of us would necessarily regard them as standard speakers
I
of
appreciate
Maltese
that.
English.
Yes. Yes.
In fact, in some of my sociolinguistic work, I have noticed that we, as members of our society, we do have definite attitudes, some negative and some positive, towards various categories of speakers of Maltese English.
Yes.
Just to give you a few examples, there is a well-known characteristic of some varieties of Maltese English in which the R is pronounced as R rather than E. And so you say things like mechanical engineering, and people just look down on that and you're condemned for the rest of your life for saying that.
Yes.
Whereas if people say something like an alveolar T instead of a dental T, then those people are regarded as being really snobs, for instance,
Right.
by the other section of the population. I mean, these are very definite attitudes which you can come across.
Yes. Yeah.
That's one of my points. I'll leave some more for later.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, that's... so there's two things there. The second thing is sort of looking down on someone for either supposedly, as a result of their speech, they're revealing themselves to be either ill-educated or ridiculous snobs. What's so interesting is how arbitrary the actual linguistic distinctions that end up bearing the weight of these social distinctions are. You know, there's no doubt that they're arbitrary, right? There's nothing sort of, I mean, there's no logic to it whatsoever, is there? I mean, okay, British English speakers would never say mechanical, right? So you could say that, well, you might want to go down the road of saying that's why it's looked down on, but then of course your other example points in the completely opposite direction. So it's neither that there's anything inherently sort of silly about an alveolar T, or not reducing an A to a schwa. So it's neither about anything inherent in the sounds, nor is it about proximity to standard English. It's really just arbitrary. And so what it comes down to is human beings, sadly, really, really like to find ways to look down on people, right? And language is kind of pressed into service there. But it's also more complicated than that, because I don't think most people realize that language is just a proxy for the ultimate goal of looking down on someone. They really think it's about the language. So it's interesting that, and actually looking down on someone for their sort of bad grammar it's like in general society it's not a taboo at all to do that, including among groups of people who, generally speaking, consider themselves very sort of liberal, very understanding. It's often particularly acute there, So yeah, that's I think that's an interesting
point. What is
point.
even sadder is that the people who are looked down on actually accept that image, which is... And in fact, we have terminology, popular terminology, which shows you that there's this acceptance. And so we speak of people talking in a broken way or in a twisted way, or, stuff like that. Titkellem bli mawweġ, titkellem tkisser, tfarrak. Meta titkellem bid-dialett. Per eżempju, sorry il-ħin, hej. Sorry il-ħin, hej.
So I wanted to come back on the first thing that you said, but it's now slipped my mind what it was. I should.
The bit about teaching
the Broughton, yes. Yeah. Now, I'm not really an expert on most of what I presented today, and I'm absolutely not an expert on, educational policy. But, maybe it's too it was too kind of sweeping and easy for me to say, oh, we should teach people standard English. I know a lot of people, he's not on his own, this Broughton guy, in thinking that precisely because there are all of these really sort of unjust value judgments associated with non-standard varieties, there's a balance to be struck. On the one hand, you want to help people get on in life by giving them the tool of being proficient in standard English. On the other hand, you might want to kind of combat the stigma of associated with non-standard varieties, and perhaps by relaxing this insistence that it should be the standard version of English that's taught in schools exclusively, perhaps you could combat that sort of stigmatization.
If I may, Chris, his motivation was not so much the stigma as economic considerations. He was saying, why spend so much time? I mean, when we were educated in English, just to give you an example, to make us produce, what is it now? a fricative th instead of, in Maltese
yeah,
English
yeah.
we neutralize that.
Yeah.
So we had an English lady who used to say to us, put your finger, touching the tip of your finger, touching the tip of your nose, like that, and touching your chin, and then your tongue has to go out and touch your finger, like this. And,
Yeah.
and we spent hours doing this,
Right, right. Yeah, yeah.
I think I do distinguish, the fricative from the plosive at this stage in my life, but at what cost?
Right,
That
right,
was
right.
it.
Yeah, thank you.
So, were the considerations of this guy mainly phonetic and phonological, or?
No, he was saying, why spend so much effort, in teaching something which is maybe too good or too, I mean, as I say, he was almost stoned, for saying this. But
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
No, mic? No, sure. Do I need the mic?
Okay, no.
It's for the recording. It's for the recording.
It's recording, okay. No, I'm sorry if this might sound a bit garbled, but to come back to your study on the omission of the article,
Yes.
what I find interesting is the fact that you can't even attribute that particular choice to, for example, the use of the L1, in the sense that in Maltese, you'd have to use the article. You cannot say, not even in, for example, budget or rector,
Yes.
all right, which are, to me, the ones which are clearly unmarked.
Yep.
You'd have to say il-lettur,
Yep.
il-budget,
Yep.
which I think is especially, I don't know whether you actually also considered this, because sometimes,
I did.
when in certain aspects of Maltese English, the one that comes to mind is, for example, either the lack of do in the interrogatives, so stuff like you want a coffee,
Yep.
or you found it, which somehow in one way or another maybe one might attribute to the influence of the L1,
Yep.
okay, because of the absence, of course, of this particular trait.
Yep.
Now, what is interesting in these examples that you have explored, I think, is one of the special features, if you like, of Maltese English, which makes it even more of a variety in its own right.
I completely agree.
So-
I completely agree. If you were in the business of sort of denigrating Maltese English, one kind of strategy you might have is to say Maltese English is nothing more than, Maltese speakers sort of failing to reach a certain level in English. And yeah, exactly, and everything, basically, how to put it, it's like Maltese English equals real English plus Maltese or something, and exactly examples like this show you that that's not the case at all. There are many of the features of Maltese English are entirely independent of influence from Maltese. Maltese English is a set of language practices that have their own independent, currents driving them. Yeah.
on the other hand, you might want to write an article on the use of the definite article in Maltese English, where standard English doesn't have it.
Yes, yes, yeah.
You have there il-middem.
Yes.
In Maltese, we do use it. We have, for example, in-nies kiet b'afsa ta' qalb li ġiet fuqha meta semaġ bil-mewt tar-rettur. Ma nafx. Ejja, in-nies kpiet. We say, we use the feminine.
Yeah.
In-nies kpiet b'afsa ta' qalb li qabdita meta rat, for example, il-ħmar jitaffeċ mill-karozza.
Yeah, oh, thank you. Is it only knees? Yeah. That's the same in...
No, not only knees, but here I'm using it with knees.
Okay.
Now, if you want to, I'll find you more examples.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, thank you very much.
In-nies miete.
Yes.
U tista' tgħid in-nies mietu.
Yeah.
You can use the plural.
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually in Arabic. In Arabic dialect, it's very complicated.
Of course, even in Maltese.
Yeah. So this you also find this in Arabic dialects. Basically,
When explaining it to a class of students.
yeah. In Arabic, you might want to put it this way. This is an oversimplification, but I think it has some truth to it. In classical Arabic, if you have a non-human plural. Non-human plural. Yeah. like dogs, then the agreement is feminine singular.
And they don't use plural.
They don't use, never use plural, never use plural, okay? Don't quote me on this because I'm simplifying, okay? But that's the basic rule. And then let's have a sort of simplified rule of Arabic dialects, and that is, you know, any non-human plural. So this is classical Arabic, this is dialects. Non-human plural, you're going to get plural. Okay? But then,
Oh, so is an example. You say something.
yeah, this one here.
That's it.
This one here. Okay? This one here. Il-kilab matu.
Philosophy, logic, and all this.
Yes, yeah. But the point is, Arabic dialects are heavily influenced by standard Arabic, by classical Arabic. And so I think it's the influence of classical Arabic that allows you to do feminine singular agreement with non-human plurals. But then there's another rule that's a true dialect rule, and this is so confusing, and that is that human plurals can be treated as feminine singular. So it's mainly nas, people, but really it's any, you know, talaba, students. You will often hear feminine singular with that as well. Yeah. It's very interesting. It's probably the historical explanation is that if you go way, way back in Semitic, there probably was no morphological number distinction. There was only a gender distinction, and a gender agreement was kind of pressed into service as signaling number distinctions. And so you still get relics of this. You actually also see a relic of it in this, you know, what you call in Maltese the tamarbuta on the numbers. In classical Arabic, you have this crazy system whereby there's reverse gender agreement between numerals and nouns. And I think this is part of this very ancient system whereby when you had semantically a change of number from singular to plural, you didn't have a morphological means of, a dedicated morphological means of signaling that, so you just changed the gender and show it that way.
Yes, example.
Yeah, well, still to this day in Maltese, I can give an example from Maltese, you know, a is the feminine ending, but it also works as a plural for groups of people. Hadima, yeah. So, you know, from a sort of a purely formal point of view, you can't tell if this is a female worker or plural. So the point is, to change the number from singular to plural, you change the gender, is one way of putting it.
Even with Gemma, for example, we say il-Gemma inħasbet.
Right.
Meta li fin-nofs.
Okay, yeah, yeah,
Gemma.
yeah.
Gemma means a gathering
Yes, yes, yeah.
of people, of children, of animals.
Yeah, yes, thank you, yeah.
First of all, thank you for this very interesting talk,
very much,
and
thank you.
even the one at 11, even though I only came in halfway through because of, you know, job,
Yes.
so on and so forth. The one that I asked you about, the whether it exists in Arabic or not,
Remind
that
me.
sentence construction about the, do you know, we had.
Yes,
Or
yes,
waħda.
got it, yeah. Yeah.
I think it's very interesting because I think it requires a little bit of more study, because if it's not from Arabic,
Yeah,
we have to look at the origin, because
yeah.
I don't think it's something that's locally constructed. I don't think it's something which is
Yes,
built
well,
here.
you definitely get it in Italian, for example. and
Or
obviously-
Sicilian.
I don't know, but probably, and you obviously get it in English. It's this one of those, you know,
One of those.
Yeah, yeah, you know, uno, I am no good at Italian, but delle cose
Una delle cose
che è, yeah, 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 yeah. So the thing, when you asked me the question, this point did not come to my head, but now it has. The thing about Arabic is, you know, there might be other factors that get in the way. And one thing here is that the point is wahda or wihad, in those sentences I showed you, that it's functioning as a pronoun. You know, it's like one. Like in English, one of, and you just can't do that in Arabic. You can't say wahid to mean as a pronoun. It only means the number one, basically. So that's why you're never going to be able to get it from that point of view. So it's like in a different world where wahid could be a pronoun, maybe you'd get it, but you see. So it might be some other thing is obscuring what's going on.
It's actually very interesting. It's a very interesting subject. I'm actually studying, you know, I studied the Sicilian element in Maltese in my BA, and I'm keeping it in my master's. So
fantastic.
That's why when you say European, I caught on it. And
that's great. Do send me an email. Like just Google me and find my email and send me an email, because I just finished writing a chapter for a handbook that I'm editing all about the non-Arabic influence on Maltese. So there might be something that's interesting, and maybe you can tell me extra things that I've missed.
Yeah, I'm still in my bed. Another point.
Yes.
In the last point, you mentioned about the omittance of the article.
Yes.
And Professor Caruana here mentioned it a little bit. A couple of months ago, a friend of mine actually teaches English in Nashar contacted me about. I heard these students, they were saying, for example, il-lejla jiena sejjer belt. And I told her, no, it should be a mistake. It shouldn't happen. And I dismissed this as a mistake. They were the two students talking in Nashar.
Yeah.
And a couple of weeks ago, I was talking to a colleague of mine in the school I teach, which is in Pembroke.
Yeah.
Some distance apart. And she was talking to us about, me, her and another teacher, about this mistake with issue handwriting.
Right. Right.
Aħna morru belt.
Right.
Belt għaxhom ktar minn belt waħda.
Le, tirrefera għal belt Valletta. Għannek qed nirreferu għal belt Valletta. Issa, the first time I dismissed it as a mistake, but the second time it got me thinking.
Yeah.
It's still one example.
Yeah.
And those examples that you are mentioning got me thinking. Just a comment.
Yeah. No, it's
whether it's just a singular case, or whether we will be seeing more of these in the future. Right now, we will consider it a mistake.
Yeah.
And it is a mistake. I think everyone here will agree that it's a mistake.
Yeah.
And I think it's a mistake.
Yeah.
But it's just a point that got me thinking.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Now, let me just ask one thing. This is my ignorance of Maltese. With sayyer, do you need a preposition? Do you need like, no, it's transitive. Okay, fine. But yes, see this, you get this. Yeah. You get this in English too, not in standard English. What happens is, with going, it's going to the town. People omit both the to and the. Or actually, when it's like place names that don't have a the anyway, then they just omit the to. I remember there was like a tweet from a footballer a few years ago, and he said, "Am I going Stoke? No. Am I going Southampton? No." He's leaving out the to, and you hear it the whole time, like, I'm going station. I'm going station. I'm going shops. Do you want, So there's something interesting going on there. And I also know that in Romanian, they have an article, but in a prepositional phrase, the article is omitted. There's some strange, interesting interaction cross-linguistically between prepositions and articles. Another example from English is out of the. Look out the window. Look out the window. You can also say, yeah. So, okay, then we're not dropping the but we're dropping the of. But the is crucial because, you know, you cannot say, like, in my spare time, I like looking out windows. It's completely impossible. You have to say out of. But when there's when it's definite, you can drop the of. So there's something about prepositions and articles which means either both can go or one can go. Yeah.
Can I suggest that possibly in this case, it's, you know, it's the influence of English, because in English you would say, I'm going to Valletta.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, my prognosis for Maltese at the end of my career is that it's going to sound like English in translation, basically.
Yes.
And
yeah.
we're getting this all the time, you know, in so many areas of the language.
Now, let me ask you another thing, because I've been in Malta since Saturday, and what keeps happening to me is I think that a place name, maybe this is just me being wrong, but I think it's not me just making it up. I think a place name has no article. I feel... Sorry? No, any well, like, for example, I thought Ala in Gozo, I thought it had no article. Yeah, but maybe it was just my mistake, but I thought I'd heard people use it without an article, and not only Ala, different places. And then it happened again and again that I saw a sign, and there on the sign is the article. So perhaps I'm just mistaken. I might just be mistaken, but I feel maybe people sort of colloquially refer to a lot of the towns which sort of officially have an article, they refer to them without the article. I don't know. Right. Okay.
Chris, in...
Yeah. Okay, maybe it's just that.
In the speech of Maltese people who are, you know, very, you know, sophisticated in English, they also omit the hal, and they say, "I'm going to Attard," for instance.
I see. Okay. So that's right.
Feminine there is used not only for beings, it is used, for example, Hwienet Taiba, good shops, Bleed Taiba, good cities.
Right. Okay.
And many other words.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Chris, can I come back to your examples with singular and plural?
One of those which...
One of those which and stuff like that. I was a bit puzzled by your remark that you can't find a non-technical explanation for.
Yeah.
But does that mean that you have a technical explanation for?
Yeah.
Because I just thought of one.
Okay.
It's a bit technical, but it's not, you know. So I was thinking that a speaker is faced with syntactic and semantic relationships, shall we say.
Yeah.
And the syntax seems to be going in one way, the semantic seems to be going in another way. But overall, if a speaker is not so sophisticated and not so attentive and not so, well, pedantic about what he's saying, there's just basically two possibilities, singular and plural, and he might opt, you know, almost by chance, for the one which happens to be nearer the point at which the expression has to agree, shall we say.
Yes, I don't think that's the answer. That's, you know, what's known as attraction.
Yeah, and proximity effects.
Yeah, proximity effects, yeah. Like, what would be an example? The head of I don't know, it's not a great example, but the head of the most prominent nations take, you know, the point is it's head, but there've been a lot of words in between, and his nations. I don't think that's what's happening, because no, the structure of the construction actually works against that explanation, because the thing that you might be agreeing with, the one, is actually further away than what you're supposed to be agreeing with the plural, you see.
Okay, so proximity wouldn't work there, but still you'd have the vague awareness in the speaker. You know, that there's a singular possibility or a plural possibility, and the opts for.
Yeah, but my difficulty with that sort of explanation is that, you know, as you very nicely illustrated for me when I first showed those examples, people don't have the sense of it at all as being like an error or a slip or this sort of thing. You know what I mean? It seems it's just a perfectly okay variant. So I'm not keen on an explanation in terms of sort of processing difficulties or that sort of thing, personally. Yeah.
But there is also, because otherwise you would put takes.
Yeah.
They have takes.
Yeah.
But there is also difficulty with the S and use of the S in the third person.
What's the difficulty?
Okay, so are there any...
It may be eliminated, but there is...
Okay, do we have time for one last comment or question? Or
well, the rest can be left out.
Yeah, okay.
Actually, we're running out of time, so I guess we wrap it up.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chris.
Yes, thank you.
We have... So we have another talk, one final talk tomorrow at 5:30 in the Arts Lecture Theatre. Luke is going to talk about the relationship between Maltese and Arabic, and what can we learn from Arabic by looking at Maltese and vice versa. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mike.